The night of the charity gala arrived with more excitement than usual. It was one of those events where people dressed in clothes they did not wear often, just to be seen by others who were dressed the same way. The luxury estate hosting the event was known in the city for its tall glass windows, endless gardens, and the massive ballroom inside that looked like something from a film. People had been talking about this night for weeks, saying it would be the most glamorous gathering of the season. Expensive cars lined the circular driveway, waiting for attendants to take their keys. Photographers stood near a decorated walkway, ready to capture guests arriving inside. The ballroom shimmered under warm golden lighting. Every table looked like it belonged in a magazine. Perfectly polished glasses, tall shining cutlery, napkins folded with sharp edges, and plates decorated with tiny flowers. A long buffet table stood at one side, filled with dishes that most people could not pronounce. Musicians were supposed to play soft background music, though their instruments were still off to the side. People were laughing loudly, greeting each other, and speaking in that polite tone reserved only for events, where everyone tries to impress one another. In the middle of all this luxury, a small team of servers moved quietly between tables. Their steps were fast, but careful. They carried trays with glasses, plates, and appetizers that cost more than some people earn in a day. The servers were invisible to the guests, not because anyone told them to be, but because it was an unspoken rule. When people come to a place that feels expensive, they often look past the people who make it run smoothly. Among the servers was a young man named Eli. He was not new to working events like this, though it was still a job he found unusual. He wore a clean uniform, same as everyone else on staff: black trousers, white shirt, fitted vest, a dark tie, and shoes polished so well he could see his reflection when he bent down. His hair was neat, and he moved with quiet purpose, while other workers chatted during short breaks. Eli stayed focused. He listened carefully when the event manager gave instructions and followed every detail. He wasn't quick because he wanted praise. He simply believed that doing something properly mattered. As he refilled glasses and placed small plates in front of guests, he tried not to stare too long at anything. People like him were meant to blend into the background. Still, there was one thing inside that ballroom he struggled not to look at. Near the center of the room stood a grand piano, smooth dark wood, polished so beautifully that the light bounced off it. It looked untouched, almost like a piece of decoration rather than an instrument meant to be used. The lid was slightly open, revealing strings and hammers that would have sounded incredible in that giant room. Most people ignored it, but Eli could not help it. Every time he passed it, he took a small look, then forced himself to look away. The evening moved quickly. Someone in charge had announced that dinner would start soon. Guests began finding their seats, laughing, adjusting their suits and dresses, and talking loudly about vacations, business deals, and travel plans. The smell of rich food spread through the room, carried by steam from silver platters. The music that was meant to play still had not begun. No guests knew anything about the servers, but servers often knew things about the guests. Just by walking around them, Eli could hear pieces of conversations about expensive homes, private schools, and questions like, "Which city are you flying to next week?" He did not dislike anyone. He just felt like all of this existed far away from his world. He did not come from luxury. He worked these events to help pay bills, support his household, and keep his life steady. Though he did not complain about anything, there was a quiet difference between the world he was serving and the world he belonged to. But what nobody knew, not the manager, not the other staff, not one single guest, was that the quiet young server was someone entirely different. When not carrying trays, his life had once revolved around music. He had been drawn to piano long before he understood anything about instruments. When he was younger, he heard someone playing at a community center, and the sound never left him. He remembered staying behind to listen, even when nobody asked him to. Eventually he learned to play, and the piano became his favorite place to express what he could not say out loud. His father used to say that music was not just notes, it was memory, emotion, and truth. When his father passed away suddenly, everything changed. Life became heavier, adulthood arrived too quickly, and the dream of attending music school had to pause. Bills needed to be paid, family needed support, so the piano became something he loved but no longer chased. Working events like this was a way to keep life moving forward. This night, though, the piano was not just an instrument in the corner. It was a reminder of something that once mattered deeply to him. As he walked past a group of guests standing near the piano, he slowed slightly, only for 1 second, long enough to look at the keys. "You don't need to be looking at that," the event captain whispered behind him quietly, not unkindly, just reminding him. Eli nodded and continued working. During the first part of service, nothing unusual happened. He moved in patterns, delivered drinks, stepped back, refilled trays, walked carefully, smiled politely. Guests complimented the food, complimented the decorations, complimented everything except the people who were actually carrying them. At one point, he paused near the buffet table to breathe. He looked across the ballroom again and noticed that the piano was still untouched. He imagined the sound of it. He imagined what could fill that room if someone played. He imagined for just a brief moment that he could sit there and play something calm and warm, something that would fill every corner of that enormous hall. Then he reminded himself that people like him were not meant to sit at such instruments in events like this, not while wearing an apron, not while collecting plates. Later, while serving salads to a group of guests near the back, he overheard someone saying, "The entertainment should be starting soon. I'm surprised there is no music yet." Another person answered, "Well, they said the pianist is running late." Nobody cared much beyond that. They turned to their meals and continued loud conversations. Meanwhile, the staff stayed busy. The event manager walked around giving instructions, checking trays, making sure nothing looked out of place. The guests remained pleased and unaware of what the workers carried on their shoulders. Before dessert service, a few guests walked over to the piano. They touched it not to play, but to compliment how beautiful it looked. One person said, "Even if nobody plays it, it just completes the room, doesn't it?" Eli heard this but kept moving. He did not dislike anyone or judge them, but he felt something quiet in his chest, something like sadness, but softer. Some instruments are meant to be played, not admired like furniture. The night was far from over, yet something felt unfinished. The ballroom was bright, the food was rich, the conversations were full of laughter, but the silence where music should have been made everything feel incomplete. The grand piano still sat alone under the lights, waiting for someone who would never arrive. Guests assumed a musician would eventually walk in. Workers assumed nothing would change. But Eli, without saying it out loud, knew this room needed sound. Not random notes, not loud music, something emotional. Something living, something real. But he stayed quiet, as he always did when at work. He reminded himself that jobs are not meant to fulfill dreams. Jobs are meant to be done well. He continued passing through tables, refilling glasses, wiping surfaces, smiling politely, carrying trays that felt heavier every hour. But every time his walking path forced him past the piano, something inside him stopped, not physically, but hidden inside. He wanted to sit, he wanted to play, he wanted to fill that room with the one thing he knew he could give. But workers don't do that. Servers don't suddenly sit and perform. People do not expect that. Worlds like this are built on invisible lines, and crossing them can cost someone their job. So he worked, and the piano waited, and no one, not even he, knew that before the night was over, everything inside that ballroom would change. The dinner service continued like every other event, but Ellie's mind stayed in a different place. He worked fast, careful not to spill anything, careful not to make noise that would disturb the guests. But deep inside, something was slowly moving. Old memories, quiet dreams, hopes that once mattered but seemed far away now. There was no point thinking about any of that. Work had to be done. He carried trays back and forth, stacked used plates, and replaced cutlery. Every time he passed the grand piano, he looked at it without meaning to. And every time he looked away before someone noticed, that piano brought back memories he thought he had put away years before. Things were different. Back then, he had countless afternoons when life felt simple and full. He remembered sitting in a small living room, where the sunlight poured in like warm honey across the floor. An old upright piano stood near the wall. It wasn't perfect. The paint was fading, and a few keys had chipped corners. But that piano was one of the few things that made him feel connected to something bigger than himself. He didn't learn by watching videos or attending expensive classes. He learned by listening. He would sit, press a single key, and wait. His father would sometimes sit beside him, not telling him what to do, just letting him explore sounds at his own pace. "You don't need to be fast," his father once said. "You just need to feel what you're playing." Those words stayed with him for years. Even when he grew older, he practiced alone, late at night, softly so no neighbors complained. He would sometimes play simple pieces, sometimes things he made up. Each key carried emotion. Each note was like a thought turned into sound. When his father became sick, those piano moments changed. Music was no longer something light and joyful. It became a way to hold on, a way to breathe. It was the only time he didn't feel afraid of what might happen. He remembered nights when he played quietly while his father rested in the other room. He didn't know if his father could hear it, but he hoped the sound brought comfort. Then one day, everything changed. Life demanded responsibility, and dreams became something secondary. Music school required money he didn't have. Bills needed to be paid. There were hospital costs, rent, food, and long days that left little room for anything else. So the piano became less of a dream and more of a memory. Still, he played when he could, but never like before, not with the same free spirit. And now, here he was at a party full of glittering decorations, serving people who spoke about investment trips and new home renovations. He wondered if that younger version of himself would even recognize the person he had become. But he did not allow his thoughts to slow his work. A guest waved at him, asking for more sparkling water. He nodded and walked to get it. Another wanted an extra napkin. Someone else asked when dessert would be served. And all of it reminded him dreams didn't pay wages. Work did. He placed glasses on tables, made sure everything looked neat, and reminded himself of the rules. Keep your head down. Be polite. Don't say more than needed. Do the job correctly. But even with discipline guiding him, his mind drifted again. He remembered how, before everything changed, someone from a small music program had offered him a chance to enter auditions for a scholarship. He never got the chance to go. He kept the email for a long time, reading it occasionally, imagining what would have happened if life had allowed something different. He sometimes imagined himself walking into a concert hall, not as a worker, but as someone who belonged on stage, someone who created sound instead of collecting glasses. But imagining didn't change anything. The party went on. People laughed louder. Conversations grew heavier as drinks flowed, and the soft energy of earlier hours turned into more confident, relaxed behavior. Servers moved in straight lines so they could reach every table smoothly. The event manager whispered instructions, adjusting small details no one else cared about. A guest snapped their fingers at another server to get attention, not cruel, just careless. That was the kind of night it was. Between tasks, Eli crossed paths with another staff worker who noticed him glancing at the piano again. The worker didn't ask anything, but gave him a curious expression, something like, "You keep staring at that thing." Eli quickly looked away and continued to serve later. During a short break before dessert, he stood behind a curtain wall where staff usually rested for a moment. He leaned against a chair and closed his eyes. He wasn't tired physically, he was tired mentally. Tired of knowing he had something inside him that people would never guess. Not because he deserved to be known, not because talent should make anyone special, but because sometimes life leaves valuable things hidden inside people, and it wasn't fair that nobody saw them. He took a deep breath, stretched his shoulders, and went back out. The ballroom looked different now. Dinner was ending. People sat comfortably, laughing with more ease. The musicians they hired earlier still had not arrived. Now people were beginning to comment more often. Are the performers coming? Is there live music or not? I thought there was entertainment tonight. Someone casually said. Maybe they canceled. Someone else replied. Well, that's disappointing. But even in disappointment, guests did not seem angry. They were too caught up in enjoying themselves. Meanwhile, the piano sat silent under bright light, making it look even more important than it had earlier. One could almost imagine a spotlight forming above it. Eli stood across the room and wondered if anyone other than him could see how wrong it looked, an instrument built to create emotion, sitting untouched. He remembered times he played at small gatherings, little parties at community centers, holiday events in school halls, and afternoons when families would bring children to listen. He remembered smiling faces, people clapping, people asking where he learned. Nobody at those events cared about expensive clothes or perfect decorations. They listened because the music was honest. Then another memory came, one of the last times he played in front of people. Someone told him afterward, "You should continue doing this. Don't stop." But life had stopped it for him. The dessert service began. Small plates with fancy decorations, chocolate drizzle shaped like leaves, fruit cut into perfect cubes, and gold sprinkles that looked dramatic under the lights. Guests lifted phones to take photos before eating, not because they were excited about dessert, but because posting pictures of expensive food made them look impressive. Some guests asked for coffee, others asked for tea. People became more relaxed, their moods lighter. Some began standing, walking around, greeting old friends and meeting new ones. At that moment, a worker hurried toward the event manager with serious news. The manager listened, face tightening. The musicians were not coming at all. Whatever had delayed them earlier had now become a cancellation. No backup, no replacement. The ballroom suddenly felt different. Guests didn't know yet, but the staff did. The manager spoke in a low, frustrated voice. How can they cancel at this hour? This was all scheduled. Someone suggested playing background music through speakers, but the host did not want recorded music. The atmosphere of the event had been planned with live performance in mind. It was clear this would become a problem eventually. Word began spreading through the guests. People started asking repeatedly why entertainment had not started. Some said it was not a big deal, but others expressed disappointment. The staff looked at each other helplessly. No musician, no one to fix the silence, no one to play the grand piano that sat waiting. Then, unexpectedly, someone on staff said, "There is someone here who can play." The event manager raised an eyebrow. "Who?" The worker pointed in Ellie's direction. "He can." And just like that, everything changed. Not immediately, but the possibility entered the room. Eli didn't hear the conversation at first. He was still clearing tables, stacking plates, keeping his head down. He didn't know that his name had been spoken out loud. He didn't know that someone had just unlocked a door life had shut years ago. He only knew one thing. The night wasn't finished. Something was coming. Something he never planned for. But life is full of moments like that, when something you left behind suddenly returns. And for the first time since arriving at the estate, the thought of the piano did not feel impossible, because someone had spoken. Someone had noticed. And now, without knowing how, Eli would soon step out of the role that everyone assumed he belonged in. The room still buzzed with laughter and conversation, unaware that the quietest person in it held the answer to the silence no one wanted. Part 2 ended not with a performance but with possibility. And possibility is sometimes even louder than music. The moment his name was mentioned, everything began shifting in small, silent ways. Eli didn't know it yet, but people were already looking at him differently. The event manager walked toward him with quick steps, the kind of steps that carried urgency. Eli was wiping a table and didn't notice anyone approaching until the manager stood right beside him. "Can you play the piano?" The question sounded unbelievable, almost strange. Eli froze. His hand paused mid-motion. He could have ignored it. He could have laughed and said, "Not really." But honesty rose before he could hide it. Double quotes, "Yes." He said quietly, "You mean really play? Not just a few notes?" "I can play," he answered again. The manager stared at him in disbelief. He wasn't angry, just confused. How could someone working behind the scenes be the one to rescue the night? "How good are you?" It was a question that no musician ever knows how to answer. "Good compared to who?" "Good compared to what?" He simply said, "I play well enough." The manager sighed, not satisfied, but the situation gave no freedom to doubt. "Come with me for a moment." Eli followed reluctantly. His heart pulsed a little faster with every step. They walked toward the host of the event, a well-dressed man with confidence in his posture. He was the kind of person who spoke and people listened, not because he demanded power but because he carried strength effortlessly. "This is him," the manager said. The host looked at Eli. Quiet clothes, worn shoes, carrying the posture of someone who did not want attention. "You can play the piano?" "Yes," the host breathed out slowly, not frustrated, just in disbelief. "Will you play for us tonight? Our scheduled musicians are not coming. I need someone to fill the room with something beautiful." Eli looked down. "I don't have proper clothes to perform in." The host looked him up and down. The apron, the vest, the shirt slightly wrinkled from work. "Clothing does not matter," he said. "Music matters." That sentence felt like a door opening. Eli almost refused. His instinct told him this wasn't his place. People were eating expensive meals and discussing expensive lives. His hands were not meant for performing here. His hands were meant for carrying plates. He took a breath. "I can play," he finally said. Those 3 words, spoken gently, shaped everything that followed. There was no cheering, no reaction, just a small nod from the host. "Finish what you are doing," he said. "Then sit at the piano." And then he walked away. Eli stood still for a few seconds, trying to make sense of it. He was not prepared. He had not practiced for a stage like this. He hadn't studied pieces recently. He knew nothing about what people expected to hear. And yet, he was being asked to play. A server who brought glasses a few steps earlier whispered as he passed, "You play piano?" "Really?" Eli nodded. "Wow," the server answered, almost embarrassed. He had never known. Eli continued stacking plates, but his mind no longer belonged to the trays or the napkins or the movements of service. His thoughts connected directly to the piano keys. Not as a show, not as entertainment. But as something personal. He finished his tasks, placed his tray down, washed his hands, dried them, and stood for a moment behind the curtain where workers usually rested. He was shaking, not visibly, but inside, like something small was trembling. What if he sat there and made mistakes? What if the guests laughed? What if the music sounded weak in a large room like this? What if he embarrassed himself? No one ever expected him to do anything extraordinary. Serving was safe. Serving was invisible. Playing was the opposite. Playing would expose who he was. But the moment had appeared, and there was no reason to run from it. He walked toward the piano. People didn't notice at first. They were finishing dessert, sipping coffee, chatting comfortably. The lights above the piano made the polished wood glow softly. He approached the bench, gently wiped dust off with his sleeve, not because it needed cleaning, but because his nerves needed movement. He sat down. The seat felt different from any piano bench he had ever sat on, not because of its softness or shape, but because he was sitting in front of it as someone people would watch. He lifted the lid fully, revealing the reflection of lights on the strings. Someone from across the room finally noticed. Is someone playing? People turned, chairs shifted, conversations paused. The room wasn't silent, yet not completely, but attention began forming in his direction. He placed both hands on the keys without pressing. He needed a moment to breathe. He had no planned piece, no sheet music, nothing rehearsed. Then he remembered something simple, emotional, something he had learned when he was younger and still believed life had room for music. He pressed the first key. Just one, a single note, soft, trembling slightly but beautiful. Then another, then a third. Those notes formed a gentle beginning, slow like warm rain falling through quiet air. People turned fully now, not dramatic, not exaggerated, just curious. The sounds grew, flowing from one note to another like a slow river. He did not play loudly. He played with softness that made the crowd lean forward rather than lean back. Within seconds, conversations dropped off, forks paused, cups rested on saucers. The music was not fancy. It was honest. He moved into a soft melody, a piece he once wrote in a notebook, now lost. It was something warm, something shaped from memory rather than instruction. His right hand carried melody. His left hand shaped rhythm beneath it. And suddenly, the ballroom changed. Everything, the expensive decorations, the lavish lighting, the polished tables no longer mattered. The music, calm and full, wrapped itself around the space. A woman near the front lowered her phone slowly, forgetting to take a picture. Two guests at the end of a long table stopped mid-conversation and simply listened. Even the workers paused, watching quietly from the corners of the room. It was not just music. It was feeling. When he reached the middle of the piece, he played with slightly stronger notes, still gentle, but filled with an emotion that only someone who once loved something deeply could create. Someone whispered softly, "He's good." Someone else whispered, "Who is he?" He didn't look at anyone. His eyes remained slightly lowered, focused on the keys, breathing through the music. When the melody began to soften again, he shifted into something else, something not written anywhere, but remembered from life experiences. He remembered his father sitting beside him. He remembered nights when he played in darkness. He remembered feeling as if music was a secret language only a few could understand. His hands reflected those memories. Then, gently, he played the final phrase. Not abrupt, not forced, a quiet ending. He lifted his hands slowly. The room fell still. A moment of silence lived between that last note and the response. Then, without prompting, clapping rose softly at first, then louder. Not applause for entertainment, but something deeper. Something appreciative, something emotional. People looked at him like he stepped into existence for the first time. He nodded slightly, not smiling widely, just acknowledging. And then something unexpected happened. The host of the evening walked toward him and said loud enough for many to hear, "That was beautiful. Do you have more?" Eli took a breath. "Yes." "Then play again." There was no polite refusal, no fear now. He began again. This time, he chose something familiar, a classical piece he had memorized long ago. His fingers moved more confidently. The melody unfolded smoothly, freer than before. People recorded now, phones pointed toward the piano, capturing not a professional musician, but a server wearing an apron, giving them something they did not expect. But the recordings didn't bother him, because in that moment, nothing existed outside the piano. He finished the second piece. Applause again, stronger this time. No one resumed normal conversation. The food became unimportant. Every single person, whether they understood music or not, recognized that something uncommon had just happened. The host shook his hand. "You saved this night," he said. Eli whispered, "Thank you." Then, he stood from the bench, not dramatically, and walked away quietly before people overwhelmed him. He didn't want praise. He didn't want spotlight. He only wanted to breathe. He stepped behind the curtain again, letting the applause fade behind him. Workers looked at him in disbelief. One whispered, "You never told us." He shrugged. It never came up. But inside him, a soft flame lit again. Something that had once been dim. Something that life had forced to sleep. Something that was finally awake. Not fully, not confidently, but awake. The guests still talked proudly now, not about their travels, not about their business, about the unexpected musician who came from nowhere. But he did not listen. He washed his hands again. He got a new tray. He returned to service, because humility remained stronger than any applause. But something inside him was different now, and the night was far from over. For the next several minutes, the sound of applause softened and slowly blended back into the usual atmosphere of the event. But something had changed that could not return to how it was before. The guests didn't just eat and talk anymore. They kept glancing toward the piano, expecting more, hoping he would return. Conversations were now filled with questions. Where did he learn to play? Why was he working as a server? How long has he been doing this? People didn't know who he was, but they wanted to know. Meanwhile, Eli continued working. He carried new trays, cleared dishes, collected cups, and wiped tables just like earlier. His face was calm again, as though he hadn't played at all. It looked as if he had placed the performance in a sealed box inside his heart and put it away. But the people had not put it away. They were still thinking about it. At one corner of the room, a guest who wore an expensive watch and navy suit walked up to the event manager and quietly whispered, "Can we ask him to play again later?" The manager looked around, nodded slowly, and said, "I'll speak to him." Another woman in a long silver dress stood at the piano, running her fingers gently across the instrument, almost as if trying to understand how sound like that could come from someone who had just been carrying plates. A group near the center of the ballroom kept replaying the performance on their phones, saying things like, "Listen to this part, and this is my favorite part." Even the servers were behaving differently. They were lighter, almost proud, even though they had nothing to do with the performance. It was enough for them to know that someone from their team, someone like them, had surprised an entire room. But Eli kept quiet. At one point, another server stopped him while he was stacking bowls. "Do you perform somewhere outside of here?" "No," he answered softly. "Are you going to?" He gave no answer, not because he didn't know, but because he honestly didn't even know what was possible. He went back to work, walking through the ballroom again, this time hearing fragments of conversations about him, though he pretended not to hear. Maybe he learned on his own. He could easily perform professionally. He should not be working here. He wanted to say, "I am fine working here." But that wasn't entirely true. He was grateful for the job, yes, but hearing people speak like that stirred something old inside him, something he used to feel when he still believed life was wide open. The night continued, and the staff served drinks again. People lined up at the bar, requesting coffee, sparkling water, tea, and almost everyone kept turning toward the piano as though waiting for someone to walk back to it. The host approached again, not as boldly as before, but with thoughtful presence. "Would you play again?" "People keep asking." Eli looked up. "I can," he said quietly, "whenever you're ready." The host replied. He didn't pressure. He walked away. This time, when Eli walked toward the piano, the room became silent before he even sat. He didn't rush. He didn't step confidently like a performer. He moved like someone doing something simple, familiar, personal. He sat again. He touched the keys gently as if greeting someone he hadn't seen in years. And without introducing or preparing, he began. He chose something soft, something emotional, something slow. He didn't want to show off. He just wanted to play truthfully. His hands moved in calm patterns, creating a melody like a whisper. No dramatic beginning, no showmanship, just quiet honesty. And the room reacted differently this time. People didn't just listen. They absorbed. They leaned back, closed their eyes, breathed slower. It felt like the music reached each person separately, as if each note carried a thought meant just for them. He moved into a part where both hands traveled in opposite directions, one low, one high, and the audience understood that whoever this young man was, he was not simply good. He belonged to the piano in a deep way. Then something unusual happened. One of the lights above dimmed slowly, as part of an automatic lighting sequence programmed earlier, and suddenly his performance looked like something staged, a spotlight forming over him. Though it wasn't intentional, the moment had a stillness that was almost unreal. The melody rose gently, then paused, not unfinished, just resting. People understood the silence the same way they understood the sound. His music didn't just fill space, it shaped silence. When he finished again, the room exhaled. Not a loud applause first, a breath, a pause, a moment. And then applause rose, full and sincere. People didn't just clap politely, they clapped as though thanking him. Someone stood while applauding, then another. Soon several people rose to their feet. It wasn't a formal standing ovation that people give at big concerts. It was more human than that, more spontaneous. He nodded, expression soft, humble. He didn't take credit with a smile. He didn't wait to be praised. He simply stepped away from the bench and returned to work. That alone impressed people more. Someone whispered, "He played like that," and then continued serving drinks. Someone else said, "He doesn't even want attention." That humility made the performance even bigger. Back behind the curtains, workers stared at him like he had turned into someone new. "You're amazing," one said quietly. "Where did you learn that?" He just shrugged gently. "When I was younger," he said. In another moment, an older staff member approached and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You should not hide something like that." The words were said softly, not as criticism, but as encouragement. Night was approaching its final part. Dessert plates were almost finished, coffee's nearly done. People had settled into the calmness music created. The event manager whispered to the host, "We need to thank him properly." The host nodded. He found Eli again, standing near a stack of trays. "You didn't just fix the night," the host said quietly. "You gave it meaning." The words landed heavily. "Tomorrow," the host continued, "I want you to call this number." He wrote something on a folded card and placed it into Ellie's palm. "Not for work," he explained, "for opportunity." Then he walked away. Eli didn't open the paper yet. He simply put it into his pocket, unsure whether to feel grateful, overwhelmed, or afraid, because opportunity is not simple. Opportunity changes life, and life had taught him that change can be beautiful but also heavy. He returned to clearing cups, not because he was forced to, but because he wanted to end the night the same way he began it, with discipline. While he worked, guests approached him, not all at once, not in a crowd, but gently, politely. A couple thanked him for playing. A young person asked if he taught music. Someone else asked if he had recordings or online videos. He just shook his head. "No, I just play." And the phrase "just play" was too small for what he had given. When the night finally began closing, he helped fold tablecloths, organize leftover trays, sweep small crumbs, and bring used dishes into the back room. Servers clocked out one by one. Some stretched their backs after long hours of walking. Eli stayed longer, as he often did, not because someone asked, but because he wanted things to end neatly. The ballroom was now quiet and nearly empty. Only soft light remained. When he returned from the back room, he walked past the piano again, now alone, just him and the instrument. He stopped, placed a hand on the lid. He didn't sit, he didn't play. He simply rested his hand on it the way someone rests their hand on something familiar and meaningful. Then he exhaled. Later, he stepped outside. The air was cooler than before. The sky was darker. The ground was quiet except for distant car engines leaving. He waited at the employee pickup area. He removed the folded paper from his pocket and looked at it. Not a company card, a personal number. Under it, a handwritten note. "Call. We need to talk about music." He folded the card again, holding it without knowing what would happen next. He didn't feel excited like a child. He didn't feel shocked. He simply felt something real. A shift, something that had been asleep had opened its eyes. And while the night ended like any other event, with workers leaving and lights shutting off, something inside him remained awake, quiet, steady, alive. Again, and when he stepped into the night air, heading home with no applause following him, no music in the background, no one watching, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Possibility. Even if nothing changed tomorrow, even if the opportunity faded, even if life stayed the same, he had played, people had listened, and he had reminded himself who he truly was. The next morning, the sun was softer than usual, almost gentle, and the city sounded quieter. Eli woke up earlier than he needed to. It wasn't stress, it was something lighter. His alarm clock had not rung yet, but he knew sleep wasn't coming back. He sat up slowly, letting the morning light rest across his small room. Clothes hung on a chair, quiet and still, and near the windowsill was the folded card from the night before. He had placed it there the moment he arrived home, not thrown, not tucked away, placed carefully. He didn't touch it yet, he just looked at it. The thought of calling brought two feelings at once. One side of him whispered, maybe this is something real. The other side whispered, don't expect too much. He stood up, washed his face, made tea, and sat down at the small table near the window. It was quiet enough to hear a bird somewhere outside. His phone sat near him. He picked it up. He dialed the number. The ringing sound felt longer than usual, as if every second stretched. Then a voice answered, warm and awake. Thank you for calling. I was hoping you would. Eli didn't know what to say first. He wasn't used to someone waiting for him. Thank you for last night. The voice continued, if you're free today, I would like to meet. Where? Eli asked quietly. Not far, the voice said. I'll send the address. Before he could think too much, the call ended. A message arrived moments later with directions. So he got ready, not dressed up like someone going to an interview, not casual like he didn't care, just simple, neat, presentable. He checked his pockets, phone, wallet, house key. Then he stepped outside. The walk felt longer than it actually was. The city noise grew a bit louder the closer he reached the location. It was not an office, not a restaurant, it was a music studio. Glass windows, quiet interior, instruments behind glass panels. He stood at the door for a moment, wondering if he truly belonged here. Then the door opened, as if someone had been waiting inside. A man greeted him, not with a handshake at first, but with genuine appreciation. Thank you for coming, he said. Have a seat. The studio was calm. The grand piano sat in the center of the room, but lights were dimmed around it, giving it a kind of spotlight effect without any real performance happening. You play differently, the man said. You don't play to impress. You play to tell something. Eli didn't answer. He didn't know how to answer. You've studied music? The man asked. On my own when I was younger, Eli responded. You never thought of performing professionally? I did, he said quietly. But life went another way. Life always goes another way. The man replied with a small smile. But sometimes, it comes back around. He stood, walked over to the piano, and lifted the lid. Would you play something? Eli didn't need to prepare. He sat, placed both hands on the keys, and allowed a simple melody to unfold. Not the dramatic piece from the event, just something gentle. The notes carried naturally, as if they belonged in the room. When he finished, the man nodded slowly. You're not looking for fame. You're not trying to prove anything. Eli looked down. No, that is why people listened. The man explained how the video from the event had already spread among guests. People had shared it. Someone wanted him for a private dinner performance. Someone else wanted to record him. Only if you want, the man added. That mattered more than everything else. No pushing. No demand. Just possibility. I don't know where to start. Eli admitted. You already started, the man said. Now you just have to step forward. He wrote down a few details, dates, and said, try one performance. Small audience. Nothing big. If you like it, you continue. If not, it ends. That was fair. That was comfortable. He handed the paper to Eli, and for the first time, Eli felt that life was not pulling away from him, it was opening. Later that day, Eli walked toward the park not because he needed to, but because his thoughts needed space. He sat on a bench beneath a wide tree. Sunlight rested in broken pieces through the leaves. A little girl nearby chased pigeons. A couple talked softly while holding cups of coffee. Someone jogged by with headphones. Life looked normal, but he felt different. He looked at his hands. The same hands that carried trays, cleaned tables, and moved people without touching them. He rested them on his knees and smiled faintly. He remembered something old, a music classroom long ago. A teacher saying, your hands speak. He didn't believe it then. He never forgot it, either. The next week arrived quickly. He continued working normally at the event hall. No one treated him differently, and he didn't want them to. But sometimes, when he passed by guests again, someone would look at him longer, as if remembering. One night, as he placed glasses on a tray, another worker whispered to him, you're playing somewhere soon, right? How did you know? Everyone knows. He felt shy but grateful. The evening of his first official performance came quietly. It wasn't a big event, not even half the size of the ballroom. A small private gathering. 20 chairs. One piano. He sat backstage alone for a few minutes before they called him. He didn't feel nervous in the way performers often do. It wasn't fear, it was weight. The weight of finally stepping into something that had once been closed. When he came out, the small audience looked relaxed. No one expected perfection. They simply wanted music. He sat, took a breath, and played. This time, he didn't hold back emotion. He didn't play for approval. He played like someone speaking to people without using words. The piece grew deeper near the middle, softer at the end. When he finished, people didn't shout or cheer loudly. They didn't need to. The quiet thankfulness was enough. Some closed their eyes after he stopped, as if wanting to hold the sound longer. After the performance, a woman approached him. "Your music reminds me of something I forgot," she said quietly. She didn't explain what that was. She didn't need to. Another man said, "You didn't play to fill silence. You played to shape it." Moments like those mattered not because they were compliments, but because they were honest. More days passed, more people reached out. Another event booked. Another small audience. He never played for large crowds yet, but every room he entered seemed to hold more expectation. He still worked his usual shifts. He still carried trays. He still clocked in and out. But now, when he passed the piano in the corner of the ballroom, he didn't simply walk by. He touched the lid every time. Not dramatically, not noticeably, just gently. As a reminder, one night, after finishing another private performance, someone offered to record him professionally, not for fame, but for a collection of classical pieces. He agreed. Recording took hours. He played the same parts many times, not because they asked him to, but because he wanted to get them right. When he finished, the technician listened with eyes closed. "That's not just skill," the technician said. "That's memory." That stayed with him, because it was true. His music was not about technique. It was about fragments of life that had shaped him. Quiet days, disappointments, old hopes, silent rooms, sunlight through windows. Everything came through his hands. Weeks later, when his first recording was uploaded online, he didn't expect anything dramatic, but small messages began appearing. Someone wrote, "I listened during a difficult moment. Thank you." Someone else wrote, "This helped me sleep." Another message said, "I didn't know why I cried, but thank you." He read each message carefully. He replied sometimes with short gratitude. Mostly, he sat silently, letting those words lift something inside him. He never wanted fame, but connection that mattered. One night, the man who originally guided him called again. "There's something unfolding," he said. A series of performances in different spaces, libraries, small halls, intimate gatherings. "People want your kind of music." Eli listened. There was no rush in his answer. "Okay," he finally said, "just one step at a time." The man replied, "And that was enough." He did not need a big stage. He did not need bright lights. He only needed a room where the sound could reach people honestly. Later that month, he returned to the original event hall, not as a worker, but invited as a performer. The staff who once stood beside him now watched from the audience. The piano looked exactly the same, but tonight, he didn't sit wearing a server uniform. He sat as a musician. He played again, not louder, not more powerful. Just clearer, cleaner, more open. When he finished, the applause echoed in a way that felt familiar but deeper. Someone from the staff wiped their eyes. Someone whispered, "He really did it," and he walked away, not proud, not celebrated with noise, but steady, softly changed, not because life suddenly became perfect, but because he rediscovered something he once thought he lost, and he didn't keep it for himself. He shared it. That alone was the story, his story, not finished, not loud, just unfolding, one quiet performance at a time.